Just a short drive from Bateman's Bay is the Mogo Zoo. Now, this is one I've been really looking forward to. This independently owned zoo is home to a huge collection of exotic animals. As you can see, we've got the convoyers behind me. I'm going to catch up with them and see what it's all about. Well, one of the best things about visiting Mogo Zoo is the up-close and personal encounters. I've got Peter and Charlene with me. We're going in to meet a rhino, is that right, Steve?
100%. Let's go and meet him.
I have never seen anything quite like this. Always leaning in for a pat.
That's exactly what he's doing.
Oh, so special.
Good boy, good boy.
So what have you got in store for us next, Steve?
Next on the agenda, I thought we might go and meet a lion. Who wants to meet a lion?
Righto. Are you ready? Yes. I've been told that the best way to make friends with a lion is a bit of a pat and a treat. I think we've got something in common. Oh, you can feel as soon as he latches on. Oh, good dog. Oh, hi! And the animals were so exotic. There was giraffes, lions, tigers, and I think the real standout with these up-close and personal encounters that were on offer. Well, one of the convoyers, Shelley, was particularly excited to see the meerkats, but she's not only going to see them, she's going to get up close and personal with one of the employees here, Sarah. Let's have a look.
They like food.
They've got this little growl.
Yeah, they're growling, but they're growling because they're excited about the food.
Tell us about those up-close and personal encounters.
Yep, so the zoo has a bit of a reputation for that kind of thing, and I think it's a way that people can, you know, really get that connection with animals. It's really important. Animals are in a lot of trouble worldwide. You know, it's a hard thing to keep people happy, but also tell them the hard truths, and that's part of our job, is to really educate people, let them get up close, get a sense of how beautiful these animals actually are.
Well, it's been an unforgettable afternoon at Mogo Zoo. I've certainly made some memories to last a lifetime. But for now, let's head back to the park for some hints and tips.
So, why doesn't Mogo Zoo, well, it's not called Mogo Zoo anymore, why doesn't Mogo Wildlife Park face any competition? Well, we need to clarify something here, because it's not as if Mogo Wildlife Park faces literally no competition whatsoever. Just on the other side of Bateman's Bay, there is another wildlife park of sorts, but it's a much smaller operation, and it's offering a slightly different product, so to speak. The Mogo Wildlife Park specialises in what we'd call exotic animals. So it has lions, giraffes, rhinoceroses, and I think it has Australia's largest collection of monkeys in captivity. Whereas the other, I think it's called Bird and Wildlife Park or something like that, its competitor, so to speak, is a much smaller operation, and it really specialises in things like wombats, kangaroos, wallabies, peacocks, and a variety of other native birds. It's not really dealing with exotica, so to speak. So we really have one dominant player in the market, so to speak, in this region, the South Coast region, and one very much smaller player. So it's not, strictly speaking, a case where we have a monopoly, but it's not a duopoly in the normal sense in which we might think of it as two large players who have roughly equal market share or comparable market share. This is where you have a very dominant player and a much, much smaller player. You can probably explain the behaviour of Mogo Zoo without reference to the other player at all. So in a sense, we could say Mogo Wildlife Park behaves as if it were a monopoly, even though strictly speaking there is another player. All right, why do monopolies arise, or why do they persist over time? Well, normally we would explain that in terms of barriers to entry, because if a firm is making profit, that will attract new firms to the market who will attempt to steal some customers, so to speak, and make profit themselves. What would then prevent new firms from entering the market? Here we think in terms of barriers to entry to the marketplace. What kinds of barriers to entry can exist? In general terms, we might say there are three categories of barriers to entry. One is where you have legal barriers to entry that are created by governments. So you might have zoning laws or licensing laws, patents, copyright, and so on, that prevent a new firm entering the market and producing a similar product. There is also firm-created barriers to entry, where the firm will generate its own protective barriers, such as it might attempt to monopolise a raw material that's essential to the production of a particular product. And in that way, you can prevent rivals from breaking into the market because they can't get access to the raw material which you have, or which a particular firm has acquired. A company might have developed an incredibly successful brand loyalty so that consumers refuse to believe that any other firm can produce a substitute product that might work for a while. So these are firm-generated barriers to entry, and then there are what we call natural barriers to entry. And these are not due to the deliberate actions of the firm or the deliberate actions of a government, but rather they're barriers to new firms entering the market simply by virtue of the nature of the market itself. So, for example, it could be, or production in the market. So it could be, for example, that a single firm could, there might be very large capital requirements necessary to set up the business, which can then result in substantial economies of scale, such that a single firm can efficiently supply the entire market itself. If there were two or more firms in the market, they might not be, and they shared the market, so to speak, they shared demand between them. You would get a less efficient outcome. That is, less might be produced at a higher price. A kind of flip side to that is that there might not be sufficient demand in a given market, and in this case we're talking about a region. There might not be sufficient demand to sustain more than one dominant player in the market. Now, of these three types of barriers to entry, we would probably say that legal barriers will certainly have something to do with it, to produce the kind of product that Mogo Wildlife Park does with its exotic animals and so on, does require, there are regulations around that, and those regulations could be quite costly to adhere to. Also, what's required in terms of land, maintenance, human resources to just run and maintain a fully functioning quote-unquote zoo is going to be very substantial. And furthermore, it's unlikely that there is sufficient demand in a given region, such as the far south coast or the south coast of New South Wales. There's insufficient demand to sustain a large number of these kinds of businesses, these wildlife park type businesses. And I think it's these reasons which are really fall under the, so we've got legal barriers that result in costs of establishing the business, and then there are the natural barriers to entry that really maintain the dominance of a particular supplier of this product to the marketplace. I'm going to stop doing the this now. That's even annoying me now. Okay, so that's probably the explanation for why the Mogo Wildlife Park doesn't face any substantial competition. All right, so Mogo Zoo engages in price discrimination. They engage in what we would call third-degree price discrimination. That is, they identify particular subgroups of their customers who they believe have different demand profiles for the product that they're offering. So because each identified group has different demand, we would say they have different prices, maximum prices that they would be willing to pay to access the wildlife park. If we look on their website, we can see that they basically have these categories of adults, children, families, and concession card holders, which basically means senior citizens and people who have disabilities. All right, so in the case of the children, the price of admission for a child, that's probably not really that relevant, because it's unlikely that you're going to have, I don't know, you're not going to have 10-year-olds rocking up and in their Lamborghinis and tossing $19 to the attendant and saying, yeah, buy something nice for yourself, and then going into the zoo. Children are going to be going with their parents, and their parents are going to be paying. So it's an admission price for a child, but it's not a price paid by the child. So really it reduces to a single adult or a family, which is an adult or more than one adult with some children or other, and as Mogo Wildlife Park has set it up, it's the bigger the family, the bigger the discount, or the lower the price per person. And then you've got the concession holders. Okay, so why are they doing this? Basically, the idea is that they're trying to make money out of the customers, and the way that they do that is to ensure that they're not pricing any particular subgroup out of the market, so to speak, right? Charging a price that's too high. If they charged everyone the adult price, $34 per person, then it's entirely possible that they would be pricing out say some senior citizens or some disabled people or families which might have a number of children. It would simply might be too expensive for a family or one of the other groups to afford to pay the adult price of $34 per person in that case. So they're engaging in this price discrimination, lowering the price. They're hoping, I would imagine, at least in theory, they're lowering the price to a level that would be the highest price each of these subgroups would be willing to pay. Okay? And in that way, they're at least generating revenue from each of these subgroups rather than no revenue by charging the same high price to everyone. Okay? So we might say it's not really out of the goodness of anyone's heart that they engage in price discrimination. It's about generating revenue at the end of the day. However, we might also add to that another reason that's not strictly speaking related to standard or orthodox economic theory, but would be more closely related to what we'd call behavioural economics, is another consideration could be that very many people think that it is morally right or that it is fair that certain groups should pay less than a standard adult. So if the Mogo Wildlife Park, or the cinemas, and there's lots of other places where price discrimination occurs, if price discrimination is not utilised, then it's violating a kind of basic moral norm. And in doing that by saying, okay, kids, you've got to pay the same price as kids have got to pay the same price as adults, or someone who is quadriplegic in a wheelchair, you've got to pay the same price as everyone else. Or a senior citizen who's on the pension, you've got to pay the same price as a company executive. People might say, that's not fair. The fact that you're doing this means that you're a morally contemptible organisation. This undermines the reputation, perhaps, it undermines the reputation of the organisation or the business, which can result in the long term, it results in a fall in revenue due to a fall in demand if the company develops a bad reputation. So price discrimination can help. Price discrimination that conforms to moral norms can also help maintain the reputation of the company and therefore will not erode demand for its product due to unconscionable behaviour. Okay, that's that.